Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby podcast. Just 4 more weekends of rugby to go until we hit the end of this season. Thankfully, though, it's 4 huge weekends ahead. We have loads to get through today with Bernard Jackman and Eddie O'Sullivan. We'll be looking back at Leinster's Heineken Champions Cup semi-final win against Toulouse, previewing this weekend's BKT United Rugby Championship quarterfinals. First, though, we're going to talk about the Women's Six Nations. A disastrous campaign, pretty much, for Ireland. Ended on Saturday evening, beaten 36-10 by Scotland in Edinburgh. A first wooden spoon since 2004, and now it seems things really just getting worse. A change of head coach. Greg McWilliams will be leaving. No official confirmation at the time of recording right now here on Wednesday morning, but the IRFU said yesterday they're in discussions with him. But pretty much it does seem to be a done deal. And Eddie, just to start with you, a change of head coach at this stage of the cycle Ireland are on after the results they've had. I don't know about you. For me, it kind of just seems like it's setting Ireland only a little bit further back down the road. Yeah,
it's not ideal. This is their women's third head coach now in 9 years. I mean, it started with Tom Tierney's back in 2014. He left in 17. Then Adam Grigg came in 17 to 21. They missed the World Cup qualifier. He left. And now Greg is coming in 2021 and 23. It looks like he's gone, So it's a revolving door, which has its problems. Any coach just taking over a program, they need to kind of bed in, get their philosophy across, build their squad. Like, there's so many dimensions to trying to, as a head coach, trying to build a program. And when you have that much turnover, like at the end of each crisis, somebody leaves, and there's been crises in women's rugby in Ireland for different reasons, and rightly so. It doesn't help the program. It doesn't stabilize it. So, like, if you're trying to develop any sort of a sports program, and it's the stability around the person running it to get it done. And not saying coaches shouldn't board. But what it does is, when a coach leaves, it does destabilise the environment for another period of time. Because whoever comes in now after Greg has got to set out his stall, get his ducks in a row, start imposing his philosophy. It's just starting all over again, Now, I suppose where they are at the moment, they're at a pretty low net area, So, like, you could say that it's the only way is up now, but it has to start. It's a start again. It's a reboot again. And I think that doesn't make it any easier,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just another problem now that has to be fixed along the road to getting the women's program where they need to be,
Yeah, and that's the really frustrating thing, Birch, is that next year we're going to be into, okay, it's a fresh start. It's year one all over again. I mean, the first year of Greg McWilliams was meant to be the fresh start in year one, and then these new contracts came in, and that meant that this year was year one, and we're going to be into it all over again next season. But the bigger question then is, who wants the job? Like, this feels now like it's going to be a pretty tough sell for the IRFU to bring in a decent replacement or a decent new coach.
Yeah, look, it's not a very attractive role, to be honest, given all the toxicity that's around it. And obviously then you look at results and performances. Obviously, our worst Six Nations, I think, in 20 odd years, in terms of results. The only thing I would say is that, by the nature of them qualifying for this WX3 competition, the fixtures that they would have in October, November in Hong Kong, I think is where it's going to be played, would be very favourable. So you probably would start off on a bit of a winning streak, and then next year Six Nations, you play Italy, Scotland, and Wales at home. So in theory, you might get a bit of a better start, but obviously, it's still not an attractive position, and it'll be very interesting how they go about trying to recruit. We see John Mitchell apparently going to England. He's obviously a very high profile coach from the men's game. Then maybe there, if you will go down a different route and look to bring someone who's already deeply ingrained in the women's game in Ireland or elsewhere. I don't know what I don't know what the situation is, and I suppose it's all speculation. But until we get an official announcement, but it does seem Greg's time is over. I think it's pretty harsh on him, because if you look at he did go down the inexperienced route, trying to blood new players, trying to bring new players through, trying to find new talent. And when you go down that route and you're as kind of radical as he was, you probably do need an understanding from above that there's going to be pain in that. But I thought your article on the RTÉ website, puts it there in black and white. The biggest issue we have is a lack of talent in depth, and even not just depth. I mean, the players who are playing for Ireland at the moment are struggling in comparison to their counterparts, in Scotland, Wales, Italy, and England, and France. So, but obviously then it's the depth to that, the player, the squad that he can pick from, and making the game more attractive. There's a big issue with getting. We haven't been able to get numbers up, and whether that's because what the other offerings are so strong. Obviously, the soccer team now are successful in a very high profile way. It's not played in the private schools in any way near the level that hockey or basketball is, which is obviously where most of the men come from. That talent pool, women's GA is very popular and elite. The sevens, obviously, they've taken some of the best athletes and they're on kind of their own program. So it's a very, very tricky one, and unfortunately, there's no quick fix. I think the RFU are spending over 5 million on it, or
5.5 million.
5.5 million a year, which is quite a significant investment. So from that point of view, I don't think you can call him out for not spending money. It's obviously just what the plan is, and if you're only really creating a plan now, you're not going to see any benefits of that from 3-4 years. So I think, unfortunately, if you're to be a realist, there's more dark days ahead for women's rugby in Ireland.
Eddie, one of the things I was writing about this morning as well is the competition structures to ultimately prepare Ireland's internationals for a Six Nations Championship. And I was running through the way the season mapped out, where this year you had a sprint finish of an AIL up till Christmas, then the Interpros, and then the Celtic Challenge with this combined provinces side. Now, going forward, David Nucifora is on record as saying as the AIL ultimately is probably going to become a development league, and an expanded Interpro and Celtic Championship is what they're looking at doing. But if the Scottish and Welsh teams you're playing in this Celtic Championship are comprised basically of players who aren't in their international setup, I mean, the bulk of their squads are playing with teams in the Premier 15s in England. Ultimately, what purpose is it serving the Irish players if it's not actually bringing them up to speed for the kind of opposition they're going to have in the Six Nations a few weeks later? And if it isn't doing that, what purpose ultimately does it serve? And is it worth actually going through it in the years to come?
Yeah, I think when we start discussing strategic plans around, say, take the women's game now in Ireland, which has been through the mill in different ideations and discussions, there's often we often talk about it and we mix up the discussion. There's two discussions here. One is the long-term plan. That's the grassroots game. And as Bernard pointed out there, rugby is a tough sell because the other sports in Ireland have a very strong, like the best Gaelic footballers, female Gaelic footballers are only going to Australia and play professionally in the Australian League. Soccer is very strong. So it's hard to recruit out of those heartlands. You don't have the support of the school structure. Girls rugby in secondary schools is almost non-existent. So there's challenges there for the long-term plans. Like, how do they grow the grassroots? And you should park that, or else talk about that in its totality and discuss how they're going to grow the game at grassroots level. And then there's what you just discussed there is the short-term pathways. So the adult players, how do they get from playing for their AIL club up to, playing for Ireland? And they may have to pivot away here because, like, when you don't have that high performance platform in your country, and we've seen this in the men's game, people may not make the connection. Like, for example, the most successful Argentinian rugby team in modern time was the team of 2000, the noughties, 2006, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The model that they used, almost uniquely, was they just exported players into more professional leagues. Like around the 2006-7 period, almost the whole Argentinian team were playing in France. Like the coaches and the Argentinian coaches went to France for their camps. As the American coach, that was our model. We didn't have a game in America to support the national team, so we exported players across the globe. And that's been in America. Like Dan Lyle was famous for going to back to win the European Cup. Chris Wiles played with Saracens. Todd Clever played Super Rugby. No, the problem for us as Americans was getting enough of them overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think help. So that may be the model. We may need to export our best players into higher leagues overseas. And again, there's limited opportunities. Like England seems to be the place for them to go. Now, that might seem an anathema to developing the game here. But until those players are able to compete at that level, the Irish team is going to struggle against those teams who have those players playing against us. So, like, you can look at that model and say, maybe that's for the short term, for the next 3 or 4 years, to get us back into the mix at the tier 1 or tier 2. Our best players might have to go and play every weekend in the best league in Europe. But and it's worked for Argentina in the men's game. It's worked for other, like, you see the Polynesian Islands, like when they get to the World Cup, a lot of their players are professional overseas. So that might seem an anathema to grow in the game, but if you want these short-term gains at the top of the game, you may have to do that. And then the discussion is, in the meantime, how do you grow your generic game? The women's AIL and pros are not really at the top of the game. So that's the disconnect that's going to be a problem for the RFU.
Birch, to follow on from Eddie's point there, he's talking about the, exporting. Ultimately, it's about, you might have to export your players, but is the geography of Ireland and England such that Ireland might necessarily even have to do that? Is it possible that they could go to the RFU or whoever's running the Premier 15s and say, we want to be part of this. We want to bring, 2 Irish club sides or 2 Irish super clubs over there and have an Irish representation in this league. Make the Premier 15s even bigger on this side of the water as well, and hopefully everyone gets richer and fatter off the back of it.
Yeah, look, obviously that's a possibility. I think
I know I'm aware it's a very, very simplistic argument.
Yeah,
for a start.
Yeah, well, wasn't there supposed to be a meeting this week from the RFU post Six Nations to explain all the changes and what the plan was? So I don't know what day that's on, but I think that's going to be really interesting because obviously, unfortunately, it's very high profile and it's very difficult to stomach when you see the national team struggling like that. But the reality is that, there needs to be a very sound plan in how we're going to change, or else we're going to keep having these, year one of another new coach. So I think, that's going to be the interesting one. And maybe they are thinking outside the box, and maybe something like that, has been suggested or is doable. But until, like, Wales aren't investing a huge amount more than us in the pro women's game. But as Eddie pointed out, because of geography, a lot of their players play in that competition. So naturally they got better quicker than us. If you think back 2 years ago, I think we beat Wales quite easily. And obviously this year we lost quite heavily. And both teams kind of went into professionalism at the same time. But I think that's the key factor, is that their players, the majority of their players, play in that English Premiership. And they're still way behind England and France, but they're better than Scotland, Ireland, and Italy at the moment, and that's going to be the challenge: is getting the level of rugby that our players play week in, week out up to a higher level. And it's interesting as well. I mean, I know this is a problem that we have because we're all bagging or all the focus on this poor domestic competition, and that's not helping the people who play in it either. When the narrative is that it's a crap competition. So the sooner we kind of work out what we're going to do, and then get on task of actually making it happen, whether that's boosting our own domestic AIL, or whether it's finding opportunities abroad, or whatever it is, I'm not sure. But I think that's what the RFU, they've had a good bit of time now. That's probably the next step, is to actually say, look, this is our plan.
Yeah, we'll put a pin in this conversation and move on, because we are under the clock today. There is, by the way, though, a Women in Rugby media briefing next Wednesday. So this day next week. So I imagine there's going to be a lot of things coming out of that, and plenty more we'll be discussing here on the podcast. We'll move on to the Champions Cup semi-finals from last weekend. Leinster, comfortable winners, I think it's fair to say, against Toulouse. Eddie, myself and Birch were on the podcast last week, and one of the main things we were all in agreement on was there's no way it was going to be a repeat of 40-17 last year between Leinster and Toulouse. And as we were heading into the clock going into the red at the Aviva Stadium on Saturday, lo and behold, it was 41-17.
Yeah, I don't think anybody saw it coming, because Toulouse, to be fair to them, have been a real threat in the way they played the quarterfinals. They just look very good. But fortunately for Leinster and unfortunately for Toulouse, Toulouse imploded. There was just a shocking day out. Like, there was a litany of things that undid them. Some of it was like self-imposed before the kickoff, having a 6-2 split on the bench. Now, that's not unusual to do that, but it's all great until something goes wrong. And then, taking the best player in the world out of his best position, moving him to 10, taking one of the best 10s in the world and moving up, because one injury in the first few minutes of the game, and you just deconstructs your whole attacking team. And then the notion that was a disaster. And I know teams do that for reasons that they want some impact off the bench, they want extra forwards, but that's fine until you get a couple of injuries in the backs, a key injury, and suddenly the whole thing unravels. So that was the first thing that, Toulouse screwed up on that. And then the second thing was, I couldn't believe, well, I suppose you can because they're French, but their discipline was shocking. Like, it was shocking discipline. Like, and it wasn't just the 2 yellow cards, but they were just giving away penalties like freebies, like just like giving out sweets at Christmas, They just kept giving stupid. The penalty count at one stage was 6 or 7-0. And they were wondering why the game was slipping away from. And then the 2 yellow cards killed the game. Certainly the second yellow card. I think, like, the Netty yellow card, which was a bizarre one, we could talk about it, is that Ramos had just kicked a magnificent 50-22 into the corner. If Toulouse go down there and score, the game is back on. Like, it's back in the hopper. Yeah. So Netty gets yellow carded, Leinster driving a maul, and the game is over. And then it's just by how much now. So, like, the level of implosion that came from Toulouse was shocking, between the indiscipline. And then to be fair to Leinster, credit where credit is due. We don't want to take anything from Leinster. Like, they scored 28 points on 2 yellow cards. Like, that's, talk about cashing in, like, you'd rarely see, like, you see yellow cards every week, but you rarely see teams like cashing in like 14 points on every yellow card. So when you put it all together like that, no wonder the score was so lopsided. And that was the disappointment. We all wanted a nail biter that Leinster were going to win, no question about it. Like, it was such going to be a great day out, but it went south early on. I just thought after half an hour, this game is going nowhere. No, I have to say that until the Netty yellow card, I was saying, no, well, maybe here there's a chance, but Netty kind of killed the day, and that was a bizarre yellow because, like, Van der Fleer charged the ruck. Like, most referees tell players don't do that. But he had 2 runs at it, and Netty gets yellow carded, and that's the game. So it's kind of a bizarre game from that perspective for me, watching it.
Birch, I know you thought Netty was pretty unlucky to get the yellow, didn't you?
Yeah, look, I think it's a tricky one. Obviously, the slow-mo looks really bad because his head comes back up, but I do think there's an element of you have to be able to protect yourself in that position. I mean, you're sitting duck, you're at the front of the ruck, and, if players do charge in...
Sorry to cross you, but the question I came from is, what was Van der Fleer trying to do, charging a ruck from 10 metres away twice? Like, what was Netty was standing there with his arms out, his head protruding. Like, it's a gut reaction to try and protect yourself. So that was harsh. Like, so, yeah. I mean, sorry for cutting across you, but I thought... No. Yeah, Van der Fleer's intervention, to me, triggered the whole event. That was weird.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the problem is now, I think, if you can get a yellow card on the opposition by doing that, you're going to see more of it. And actually, it can be quite dangerous. It can be quite dangerous. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting how referees pick up on that later on. I think Ugo Mola came with a plan that they needed to have 6 forwards because Leinster are so fit and they're going to take him on up front. But the problem was, it was the fact that he went with 2 scrum halves on the bench. And that's what killed him. I mean, RTÉ obviously has played winger before. He actually played winger against Leinster and he scored a winning try against La Rochelle. But he is a scrum half by trade. But to have 2 scrum halves on the bench then, obviously they have some injuries, but that's probably where, and he said afterwards, he said, look, I'm going to be, it's on me. But probably when he didn't have a proper utility back on the bench, he probably should have went back 5-3, and that was a key factor in the game. At the 10, Jesus. Intermac, sorry. Intermac at 13, DuPont at 10. The game was over then. It was over. And Leinster were brilliant. I couldn't have foreseen both semi-finals to be as one-sided last Friday. I mean, two amazing performances by Leinster and La Rochelle.
But it's interesting, Bernard. Let's see with your reaction now. It was a very salutary lesson to rugby coaches in general. Like, if you want to go 6-2 and roll the dice, you need to have thought it through so much. Like, because one injury in the first 10 minutes can't unravel your whole game. But I just thought that the yellow card against Ramos is very harsh as well. Like, again, this is another debate you can have maybe for another podcast, but like, the referee has discretion on that call. Like, if the yellow card is for an intentional knock on, right? That's the law, and the referee can decide what is intentional. Now, if you want to change the law, and I think they should probably look at this, because it takes all the if, maybe, and and out of it, is that if you go for intercept, you knock it on, it's a yellow card, end off. If you want to do that, do that. But that's not the law as it stands. The law as it stands says an intentional knock on is a yellow card, or maybe a penalty try as well. And I thought Ramos tried to intercept it. His first touch, the ball went up in the air. And that was always a good indicator that it wasn't intentional. And I think he was going for the intercept. But, I mean, the ref went straight to the yellow, For me, like, that was a big yellow, because, again, straight away Leinster cashed in 2 tries, So I think they were a bit unlucky as well. I think Toulouse were a bit unlucky. They did plot their own downfall, but I thought the 2 yellow cards, had a huge influence on the game, and maybe they mightn't have gone that way. Like Wayne Barnes, those calls went Leinster's way, end of story. If those jerseys are reversed, if that was Van der Fleer getting yellow carded, or if that was, Hugo Keenan getting yellow carded, we mightn't be so happy about it. I always do when lads do get those calls, I always do the jersey reverse. Put the other colour jersey on your guy and see, are you going to be happy about it? And I would say, if that was 2 Leinster players went to the bin last Saturday on those occasions, and the game, Toulouse are a bit unlucky with those cards, and they were hugely influential in the game. But again, don't take from the fact that Toulouse dug their own grave in one certain fashion.
Just before we finish up on Leinster then, Birch, looking at La Rochelle, 47-28 winners against Exeter. To be honest, the game wasn't even as close as the scoreline suggests. Are Leinster better equipped to take on La Rochelle in 2023 compared to last May in 2022?
Yeah, I think they are. I think our Leinster set piece is better. Leinster's, well, I wouldn't compare Leinster to Exeter. I mean, Exeter's defence was very poor everywhere, wide, up the middle, around the ruck. Now, La Rochelle were top class, and they have threats everywhere, and they do find your weakness, and they can offload. It was the most impressive La Rochelle performance of the year. But I think Leinster, even having, like, Robbie Henshaw was out, Charles Natai comes in after 4 months, Jamie Osborne was out, and he has a big game. If he had probably stayed on longer, he might even be man of the match. Jenkins comes off the bench. He's like a safety blanket. If you are getting beaten up front, he's going to give you some power. And their areas of Leinster struggled the last 2 seasons, away to La Rochelle and COVID, when they lost. They had some injuries early in the game, and their bench had no impact. And then last year, at times, I thought La Rochelle got the squeeze on them at maul time and at scrum time, and certainly the breakdown. So, and I think if you look back at Leinster's breakdown of the weekend, like, it's violent. You know what I mean? It's really, really clinical, aggressive. They're getting quick ruck speed, and I think they had quick ball all year. I think this year, when they played the bigger sides, they've been able to keep that. And Ireland obviously have as well, against like France and England, etc. So I think Leinster are in a better place. I'm sure Rochelle are in a better place. I mean, the confidence they must have from having won it last year, being back again, third final in a row. Some players, outstanding players on form. Like Satini's is class. I mean, you see Dante running water. You know what I mean? You know, and obviously he's injured, but Skelton, Aldreet is back to his best. He was class at the weekend. Bougerie. So they're formidable test for Leinster, but home advantage. It's going to be fascinating who the referee is. You know, I presume it's going to be paper. I don't think they can give it to Wayne Barnes again. But that he's going to have a massive role and say in the game.
Yeah, I can't wait for it. 2.5 weeks away. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. Finally, very quickly, Eddie, on Leinster before we move to Munster and the Ulster Connacht game. Any chance against the Sharks this weekend? You could see them getting caught on the hop, or do you fully expect them to be through to a semi-final next week?
Yeah, I don't see any shock this week for Leinster. I mean, they're very good at pivoting away as well. Like they'll park last weekend and move on. You know, they're very you listen to how their messaging is very strong on that. Like they know again, knowing that you can get caught on the hop is the key to not getting caught on the hop. You know, and Leinster know that. Like they got caught in the hop last year twice. You know, so no, I don't see it. I mean, it'll be a massive shock. I mean, every time we talk about Leinster every week and we say if Leinster lose, it'll be a massive shock. Now, it wouldn't be a massive shock if they lost to La Rochelle. That's a different bag of spanners, you know. But I think certainly this weekend there shouldn't be too much of a speed bump. Again, you never know. Like, I mean, the problem at the moment the game is, and this is about across, is we all go into these games talking about like how close it'll be or how easy it'll be based on 15 against 15. You know, a red card in the first 10 minutes and Leinster go out to 14 men, some innocuous clean out or an innocuous tackle, and the ref goes, yeah, head contact, good luck. And no, Leinster like facing 70 minutes of 14 men. Now that changes the dynamics, you know. So, but bar something like that happening, and even with Leinster, you think maybe they could probably shoulder that and still get through. But bar something like that, I can't see them slipping up at this stage. And I don't think they're going to lose their focus. I think they're very methodical in their focus, and I don't see them even thinking for a second about Toulouse or La Rochelle next weekend. You know. Yeah,
so that's Leinster and Sharks Saturday 5 p.m. Live on RT2 and RT Player, and live commentary on RT Radio 1 as well. Bernard, moving on to Munster away to Glasgow Warriors on Saturday evening. Probably looks like being the most evenly matched game of the weekend. Dennis Leamy yesterday, we were doing Munster's media call, and he gave what I thought was one of the understatements of the century when he said they owed themselves a performance after what happened against Glasgow about 5 or 6 weeks ago in Thomond Park.
Absolutely, that was a shocking reflection of where they're at, and they have bounced back since then in South Africa for sure. I mean, I thought they really rallied to get that win against Stormers, and obviously a very good performance and a good fight back against the Sharks and a draw. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because I think Glasgow are a good side. They were very good at the weekend against the Scarlets away in the Challenge Cup semi-final. Probably the worst performance in the last 3 or 4 months has been that Connacht round, the last round of the URC against Connacht, where they didn't really fire, but they were already, I suppose, home and hose in terms of placement.
A lot of players that day as well.
Yeah, it wasn't a full team, so you know, I can understand that. I think it's a real test for Munster, and it's a game they can certainly win. I think Munster at their best, particularly when you see the players come back from injury that they have at their disposal. Ty Byrne being back fit. They reckon RG Snyman could be back. Obviously bad news for Earlsey, but it's an interesting game. On form, I still have to pick Glasgow, to be honest. I think Glasgow have a much better attack than the Sharks or the Stormers showed in the last couple of weeks, and you know, and Eddie's as pointed out a few times, and against the head and on here, you know, there's still maybe concerns about Munster's defence. So until they shut down a very good attacking team like Glasgow, I think you have to be a little bit fearful of that.
Yeah, Franco Smith, Eddie, he's done a hell of a job at Glasgow. I remember last year's quarter-final at the RDS, and Glasgow put in against Leinster what was to be honest, one of the worst performances a professional rugby team has put in that I've ever seen. And 11 months down the line, here they are, one defeat in 18 games dating back to November, and playing some absolutely brilliant rugby as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he's done a good job in kind of stabilising the programme and taking it forward. But I think we shouldn't forget Nigel Carlin. It's that coach.
Yeah.
Like as Burton has said, that the Glasgow attack is top notch. Like they will rip you apart if you don't defend well, and that's I think Munster's problem next weekend. If Munster defend well next weekend, they'll probably win the game because they'll score points. They'll get into the kill zone, they'll score points, and Munster's attack has developed really well under Mikey Prendergast. But the problem for Munster's been their defence has been at times shocking, and then at other times not so bad, because they still shipped a lot of tries down in South Africa. Now they still came out the other end of it because they've scored. So like if I was looking at that game next weekend for Munster, I'd be saying it starts and ends with our defence. We defend Glasgow, which is not an easy thing to do, because to be fair to Nigel Carlin, they are playing some great rugby, some great option rugby off their rolling players. You don't know whether they're going to hit you up or out the back. There's some lovely wrinkles in there, and you really have to have your defensive headset on, or you're going to get caught. And the way the game's at the moment, you can defend 10 rucks, and if you get caught in the 11th one, it's still a try. The 10 good defensive sets before don't count. So that's the big challenge for Munster. And I think, Nigel Carlin has a huge place to say in that. He's done a great job with them, and they've bought into his philosophy on attack, and it's working really well for him. So that there is a risk there for Munster that they might come out the wrong side of this if they don't go in and defend really well. And there are doubts around their defence. That's not, gild the lily here. They've had some poor defensive performances. So that's the one thing that worries me. I'm with Birch on this one.
Just finally to wrap up on Munster then, Birch, as well, and in a quick point, you kind of hinted at there a few minutes ago, Argus Nyman, Tyg Byrne. This could actually be the first time the two of those players will be on the pitch in Munster jerseys at the same time, which is kind of remarkable considering the length of time they've both been there at this stage. But it does create a nice, interesting selection headache potentially for Graham Rowntree. Would you see Tyg Byrne potentially in the back row?
Yeah, I think he'd slip into the back row. I think he's very adept at both positions, and I think that allows you to get a bit more power in the second row. Now, whether they can, I don't know whether they start him or bring him off the bench, or whether RG's fit to start. But it just gives Graham Rowntree a nice selection headache of having two players of that quality available. And like the reality is, if they fire and once they get through this game, like they're going to be a far better team with those two at their best. It changes the whole landscape, and then you have the whole Ben Healy coming on to close out games. So yeah, once they get through this, they'll obviously it'll be a very successful end to the season for them, and they've got a freebie then in a semi-final really. But just the idea of those two playing week in, week out for Munster is from an opposition point of view, it's certainly a real challenge.
So that's 7:35 Saturday evening, also live on RT2 and RT Player, and commentary on RT Radio 1 as well. Ulster and Connacht then Friday evening. That's live on 2FM, and extended 2FM Friday evening on the radio. Eddie, it's kind of on last week's pod we kind of spoke a lot about Connacht with this matchup. So to put the light on Ulster, granted, if you want to win this thing, chances are you're going to have to beat Leinster in a final, but a home quarter final, granted, it's a bit of a leveler against it's an interpro game, and anything can happen in those, but home quarter, potential home semi if they can get there, and the possibility of catching Leinster a week after a Champions Cup final. I don't want to look too far ahead here from an Ulster point of view, but on paper at least, they're not going to get a better chance at going all the way and winning silverware if you just want to map it out ahead.
Well, everything you just said there just puts huge pressure on Ulster, which is exactly where they are. They have talked at the start of the season about this being a year for silverware, and they've had their ups and downs. They had a huge wobble December, January. They just did a typical Ulster cruising along, and then had the wheels almost came off. They reeled it back in again. They went on a very good run. I think they won their last 5 games to put themselves in second on the table. So this is it. Yeah. Now I think, to be fair to Ulster, if they end up losing a final to Leinster, there's no shame in that. Like, Leinster are one of the best teams in Europe, if not the best team in Europe, and we can argue that after the championship final. But certainly, this is a big. If Ulster were to fall to Connacht in the quarter final on the weekend, it would be a catastrophe for them, because it's just, there's no excuses. Like, they put themselves where they said they would go, and now they have to deliver it. They're at home crowd, Friday night. Ravenhill. It's an Interpro, I get that, but they've played Connacht before in Ravenhill. It's not a newbie. So
beat them comfortably there in September.
Yeah, no, it's a knockout game. So, like, Connacht will come and throw the kitchen sink at them. If Connacht click in attack, they can be very tricky. They are a very good attack as well. They're really good to watch. But on the balance of probabilities, like, you'd have to think this is for Ulster to screw up. And the cost of that for Ulster is pretty catastrophic, because if they go out at this stage of the competition, you have to ask the question, what's all this? What are they at? What's all the talk for? Because again, they'll have, come to the crunch game, and they'll have bottled it. So I don't think they will. I honestly don't. I think they'll get it done. That's what I'm talking about from their perspective. That's why the pressure is so huge on them on Friday night. This is a must-win game in terms of their trajectory of going where they want to go as a club,
Birch, where are your confidence levels in terms of Ulster at the moment?
I agree with Eddie. I think you have to back them to get it done. I don't think they're in brilliant form. I thought they struggle at times against Edinburgh, but what's their trump card is that line-out maul. And obviously, whether they score directly off the maul or it's one of the hookers breaking off, that's been their most potent part of their attack. And that's actually surprising, because their front five have been criticised, and maybe justifiably so. But in that tight area, they're actually very well drilled and very effective. And then it's their star-studded backline that haven't really, hit the straps this year, and their attack looks a little bit one-dimensional. But you gotta fancy them to be good enough with their Ravenhill crowd to get through this. But Dan McFarland will be hoping, obviously, for a win, but a better performance, because you need to have more tricks or cards, ace cards to play than just a line-out maul when you come up against teams of Leinster's quality, if they get through. So later on in the competition. So yeah, that's, for me, I think Ulster will get through, but it's far from a certainty.
So Eddie, if I was to boil this game down to one thing, if Connacht have poor discipline on Friday night and give Ulster access to a line-out maul in the 22 consistently, can you see anything other than an Ulster win? Is it all ultimately down to how Connacht? Well, not all, but I mean, if Connacht want to have a chance in this game on Friday night, is discipline the number one thing?
Of course it is. Yeah, I mean, Connacht have to defend very well also. And defence nowadays, it's not just about making tackles and holding it's about discipline. Mm-hmm. It's the third dimension. Like, defence is about defensive systems, people making the right decisions, then making good tackles. So good system, good tackles, and the third dimension to defence is discipline. If you give up penalties on D, you end up 5 meters from your goal line, from on your heels on the goal line, and a line of 5 meters out, and trying to defend them all. And as Bernard said, it's fair also. That's the one thing this year that's really, kept them in good stead, is their maul. So yeah, if Connacht have any chance, their discipline has to be excellent, their defence has to be solid, and then they can play. But it's going to be an upset if Connacht win. Not saying it can't happen, but I'd say Ulster can't let it happen. Mm-hmm. Given where they are, just can't let this happen. They've got to win it.
So that's Ulster and Connacht, Friday, 7:35 p.m. Live commentary on RTÉ 2 FM on an extended game on, while Leinster and Sharks and Glasgow against Munster are both Saturday evening kickoffs on RT2 and RT Player and on RT Radio 1 as well. Gents, thanks a million for joining us as usual, and we'll speak to you again soon on the RTÉ Rugby podcast. A reminder as well, if you are around Dublin on Sunday, get out to the AIL final, Clontarf against Terenure College, 3 o'clock kickoff. You won't spend a better tenner this year if last year's final is anything to go by. Fellas, thank you.
Thanks, Liam.